So last week I was at this dinner party. It was in one of those neighborhoods where, the zip code alone is basically a credit score.
Right.
And I found myself sort of trapped in a conversation with this woman. She was passionately arguing that meritocracy is a myth.
Okay.
And that society should just, stop putting so much value on high-stakes testing, on elite credentials. She was so animated about it, her hands gesturing over this plate of Wagyu beef, and her eyes were just bright with this revolutionary conviction.
A tool for oppression, that kind of thing.
Exactly what she said. It's just a tool for oppression, and we need to move past the obsession with achievement. But the irony was, it was thick enough to choke on.
How so?
Because this woman was a senior executive at a top-tier firm. And earlier that evening, she'd been describing this grueling 3-year process she went through to get her daughter into a private kindergarten that cost $60,000 a year.
Wow. Okay, so there's a bit of a disconnect there.
A bit. So I asked her how she reconciled those two things, the public rejection of these elite systems and her private, absolutely frantic scramble to stay inside them. And she didn't even blink.
What did she say?
She just gave me this look. It was sort of amused pity, like I was the one who'd missed the whole point. She said, it's about the principle, not the personal application.
The principle.
Yeah. And to her, the contradiction wasn't a flaw in her logic. It was the entire point. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't about whether meritocracy was true or not. It was about the fact that she was the only person in the room who could afford to say it didn't matter.
The belief itself was the luxury good.
More expensive and harder to fake than the Cartier watch on her wrist. It just got me thinking, why have we evolved to adopt beliefs that seem so detrimental or counterintuitive? Why is the most sophisticated thing you can say often the most socially expensive?
That is the core question.
So to understand why people like her advocate for tearing down the very ladders they climbed, we have to look past the arguments themselves and get into the cold evolutionary logic of what's called the handicap. We have to ask why we've evolved this need to believe in things that aren't necessarily true, but are, without a doubt, very costly.
Okay, so let's really unpack this. In this deep dive, we're going to explore that evolutionary logic behind costly beliefs. We're going to investigate why signaling, your intellectual power or your moral commitment through these complex or radical ideas has become this high-stakes competitive sport.
And our mission here is to treat these beliefs not as, say, philosophical stances to be debated on their merits.
Right, not about whether they're right or wrong. Exactly. But to treat them as a kind of measurable currency that gets exchanged in the social hierarchy. And that's really the essential shift in perspective you have to make. What you saw at that dinner party, that ability to promote an idea that might actually harm less fortunate people while you insulate yourself from any of the bad consequences, that demands a really powerful theoretical framework to explain it.
And that framework is the handicap principle.
That framework is the handicap principle. It's a theory borrowed directly from evolutionary biology. And it really provides the foundation for understanding why any signal, whether it's a physical display in the animal kingdom or a complex opinion, it has to carry a significant, hard-to-fake cost to be seen as reliable or honest.
I think for most people, when you hear the word handicap, you think of, a disadvantage meant to level the playing field, like in golf or something. But here it sounds like the disadvantage itself is actually what elevates your status.
That's the counterintuitive genius of it. And it all started with the work of an Israeli biologist, Ahmad Zahavi, back in 1975.
Okay, so what was the problem he was trying to solve?
He was wrestling with this fundamental dilemma in signaling theory. If animals are always motivated to bluff or deceive a low-quality male trying to look healthy to attract a mate, how can the genuinely high-quality individuals ever reliably communicate their true fitness?
Because if the signal is cheap or easy to fake, then everyone just adopts it.
And it becomes worthless. It's just noise. The whole system breaks down.
So the system needs some kind of built-in mechanism to make bluffing just prohibitively expensive.
Precisely. And Zahavi proposed that the signal itself must be costly. It has to impose a measurable burden, a real drain on resources. That's the handicap.
So the principle is that only the individuals with genuinely high quality can even afford to display these costly, wasteful, but ultimately reliable signals.
Exactly. The central idea is that the signal functions just like conspicuous consumption, but in biology. It's advertising the animal's ability to successfully squander a vital resource, whether that's energy or time or even physical safety.
And the inferior individuals just can't keep up. If they try to fake it, the cost is too high and they fail.
They can't survive it, and that guarantees the honesty of the display.
Okay, so when we talk about this in biology, my mind immediately goes to the classic examples. We should probably start with the one everyone knows because it illustrates the concept so perfectly. The peacock's tail.
The peacock's tail is the canonical example. It's the poster child for this principle. From a purely objective survival point of view, it is a massive evolutionary burden.
A handicap in the most literal sense.
Absolutely. It takes immense metabolic energy just to grow and maintain those feathers. It impedes flight. It makes the bird less agile when it's trying to escape from a predator. And it basically acts as a giant, flashy eat me sign. It's a demonstrable detriment to the bird's overall fitness.
Yet, it's the gold standard for peahens when they're choosing a mate.
Because it's an unfakeable signal of superior quality. Only a truly healthy bird one, with great genes for disease resistance, one that's a really efficient forager, one with the raw strength to evade predators, despite this ridiculous tail, only that bird can manage the burden and survive long enough to mate.
So the peahen is basically conducting a ruthless quality control check.
She is. She's looking at him and thinking, if he can live with that absurd resource-draining thing attached to him, his underlying quality must be exceptional. The signal's reliability is enforced by its cost.
That makes perfect sense for a physical trait, something you can see. But what about a behavior? Something that seems just completely counterintuitive, like the African gazelle snotting. I remember this from the source material, and it's a fascinating reinterpretation.
Stotting is a brilliant behavioral example. So, when a gazelle spots a predator, like a lion or a cheetah, it often doesn't just immediately bolt.
Which is what you'd expect it to do.
Right. Instead, it starts performing these stiff-legged, really energetic jumps straight up into the air, sometimes for several seconds. It's seemingly wasting crucial escape time and energy.
It sounds like the animal equivalent of pausing in the middle of a bank robbery to do a little victory dance. I mean, why would a gazelle facing a mortal threat choose to burn valuable energy that way?
Well, earlier theories framed it as, maybe an alarm call to benefit the rest of the herd. But Zahavi reinterpreted stotting as a pursuit deterrent signal, aimed specifically at the predator.
So it's not talking to the other gazelles, it's talking to the lion.
It's talking directly to the lion. The gazelle is broadcasting its fitness level live. It's saying, look how effortlessly I can launch myself into the air. I am so healthy and so fast that I can afford to expend this energy just to show you how strong I am. You really shouldn't waste your time chasing me because you will lose.
So for a tiny energy investment, those few jumps, the gazelle is trying to save the massive energy cost of a full-speed, multi-mile chase that it would probably win anyway.
And that the predator would probably lose. It's an efficiency calculation for both sides.
Right.
The benefit to the gazelle is survival, obviously, but the benefit to the predator is efficiency. If the predator's low on energy, or if that signal from the gazelle suggests a high chance of failure, it'll just choose an easier target.
And the difference in the marginal cost is key here. The really fit gazelle can easily afford those jumps.
But the weaker, less fit gazelle absolutely cannot. It genuinely needs every last drop of energy for the sprint. If that weak gazelle tries to bluff and stots, it dramatically increases its chances of getting caught because it just wasted its emergency fuel.
This cost-benefit analysis also extends into social interactions, right? It's not just about predators and prey. We see it in things like competitive altruism.
Yes, the Arabian babbler bird is a fantastic case study for competitive altruism. These are very social birds, they live a long time, and they exhibit this helping at the nest behavior. So non-parent birds will help feed and guard nestlings, often for individuals they aren't even related to.
Which, on its face, seems to run counter to basic evolutionary logic. If the goal is to pass on your own genes, why would a babbler spend its energy helping the offspring of an unrelated bird?
It's a great question. It runs counter to simple kin selection. Zahavi's signaling interpretation explains this as a costly social display. The altruistic act is costly to the donor. Time and energy spent gathering food for others is time and energy not spent on yourself.
But it pays off in another currency.
It pays off in social status. It dramatically improves the donor's standing within the complex flock hierarchy. This enhanced status makes the babbler more attractive to potential mates and gives them priority access to resources.
So the altruism is a high-cost signal. It says, I am so successful, I have so many resources that I can afford to divert my time and energy to help others.
That's the message, exactly.
Now, this theory, as powerful as it is, I understand it was pretty controversial at first. It seemed maybe too simple, too anecdotal to be mathematically sound.
It faced a lot of skepticism, yes. particularly from major figures like John Maynard Smith. He questioned how a seemingly beneficial behavior, like stotting, could truly be called a costly handicap. But the theory gained huge scientific support in the 90s, when a theoretical biologist named Alan Graffin created a rigorous signaling game model.
And he proved the math worked. Okay, so let's spend a moment on Graffin's model, because this is where the biological insight really becomes academically solid. What did his math actually show about the signal's reliability?
Graffin demonstrated that for a signal to be reliable, the marginal cost of that signal must be proportionally lower for the higher quality signaler than it is for the lower quality one.
Okay, unpack that. The marginal cost.
Think back to the gazelle. The cost of one jump is proportional to its overall fitness. For the strong gazelle, one jump might cost, say, 0.1% of its remaining energy. But for the weak gazelle, that exact same jump might cost 5% of its remaining energy.
So the fit animal gets way more signaling bang for its energetic buck.
Precisely. The absolute cost is the same one jump, but the impact on its fitness, that's the marginal cost, and it's vastly different. This ensures that only the high-quality individual can maintain the extravagant signal without collapsing, which guarantees the honesty of the message. This mathematical proof was the missing link. And it mirrored, interestingly, earlier insights from economics.
And that economic parallel is so important because it's the bridge that takes us directly to human behavior.
Yeah.
You're talking about Michael Spence's Nobel Prize-winning work on job market signaling.
Exactly. Spence showed that in a competitive job market, an expensive, time-consuming education like a degree from a top university acts as a costly signal of an applicant's quality to employers.
The knowledge is important, sure, but the degree itself is the signal.
Yes. The mere possession of that degree signals diligence, intelligence, and access to resources. Only high-quality applicants can afford the time and financial sacrifice to get through it, making the degree an honest signal. It's the corporate equivalent of the peacock's tail.
Which brings us straight to Thorstein Veblen and conspicuous consumption, the most blatant human application of the handicap principle.
Veblen, writing way back in the late 19th century, he observed the leisure class and their consumption patterns. And he realized that goods were often valued not for their usefulness, but purely as status markers. The purchase of expensive, unnecessary items, what he called Veblen goods, signals wealth redundancy.
The ability to afford waste.
The ability to afford waste.
Yeah.
Whether it's a luxury car or a historical potlatch ceremony where huge amounts of wealth were literally destroyed or given away, the motive is identical, flaunting what you can afford to lose. The more conspicuously wasteful the consumption, the more reliably it signals high wealth. It's the gazelle showing the lion it has energy to spare.
Okay, so we've established a principle. For a signal to be reliable, it has to be costly. Now let's make that transition. How did this evolutionary game adapt when the rules of material consumption started to change in the 21st century?
This is the big sociological pivot. Historically, status was signaled through highly costly material goods or through time-consuming specialized activities, things like dueling or owning rare spices. These signals reflected what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called distance from necessity.
Meaning, the farther you are from worrying about basic survival, the more sophisticated your social markers could get.
Right. And Bourdieu called this sophisticated knowledge and taste cultural capital.
I remember the source mentioning the example of restrictive clothing. In Veblen's day, a stiff tuxedo or an elaborate gown was a non-verbal way of saying, I am so wealthy that I never have to do manual labor.
The clothing itself was a literal handicap. It restricted your movement, but it signaled the life of leisure.
A signal that was clear because the cost was just prohibitive for the working class. They didn't have the money to buy the clothes or the time to learn the etiquette to wear them.
Exactly. But the success of global capitalism and mass consumerism completely changed that equation.
The cost of material distinction just plummeted.
It plummeted. Thanks to global supply chains and manufacturing efficiency, goods that once signaled elite status, whether it was high-quality clothes or certain electronics or access to rare foods, they became widely accessible. So as these material goods became a noisier signal of your social position, easily copied by the masses, the affluent needed a new currency, a new, harder-to-fake currency to broadcast their high status. And that's where they decoupled status from material possessions and reattached it to ideas and opinions. This is the birth of the luxury belief.
Let's get the definition clear here.
A luxury belief is an idea or an opinion that confers status on the upper classes, often at a very low personal cost to the person holding it, while frequently inflicting disproportionately high costs or risks on the lower classes.
So its primary function isn't about truth or improving policy.
Its primary function is to signal the believer's elevated social class, their intellectual sophistication, and their possession of that cultural capital we talked about.
Let's spend some time on the concrete examples, because this is where that cost difference becomes just tragically clear. We started with the executive arguing meritocracy is a myth, while rigging the system for her own kid. Let's look at criminal justice reform.
The high-status belief here is publicly advocating for slogans like defund the police, or concepts like radical prison abolition. So you have to analyze the cost imposed by holding this belief.
For the affluent person holding this view, the personal cost is basically zero.
It's negligible. They typically live in low-crime, often gated or segregated communities. They can afford private security systems, rapid emergency response from their well-funded municipalities. They can generally insulate themselves from the immediate chaos that might result from reduced policing.
But the cost for poor and vulnerable communities is immense and immediate.
Absolutely. The data is stark. Poor Americans face significantly higher risks of violent crime. Studies show that Americans earning less than $25,000 a year are 7 times more likely to be victims of robbery and 20 times more likely to be victims of sexual assault compared to people earning over $75,000.
So when elite individuals advocate for policies that risk increasing crime rates, they're issuing a costly signal. They're signaling a level of safety and resource redundancy that others just don't have.
They're saying, I am so secure, I don't even need the basic protection the state provides. It's the ultimate virtue signal. It's a sophisticated form of competition where endorsing a radical ideology functions as a costly display of moral commitment and group alignment, all to enhance your social standing within elite circles.
It signals not just wealth, but this unique, evolved capacity for ideological flexibility, a detachment from common anxieties.
Right.
Okay, let's move to education, another area that's just full of these contradictions. The belief that college is not necessary for success, or the demand to get rid of standardized testing like the SAT.
This is a classic example of someone benefiting from a system while simultaneously calling for it to be dismantled. If you're affluent, your success relies less on objective, measurable merit and more on subjective relational capital.
Legacy admissions, recommendation letters, family networks.
All of it. So for an elite person to say college is necessary, it carries a very low personal cost. They have built-in safety nets.
But the standardized tests were supposed to be the great equalizer, the objective merit signal for the disadvantaged.
They were. For disadvantaged students from non-elite backgrounds, the SAT or the ACT is one of the only clear, objective ways they have to signal their academic potential in a system that's often biased towards the privileged.
So advocating for their elimination really benefits the elite, who can fall back on those subjective factors.
While profoundly disadvantaging the core, who rely on those merit signals to break into the system, the belief itself becomes a costly signal of your own cultural capital in network access.
And related to that education signal is just the use of specialized vocabulary. You see this with jargon like cultural appropriation, heteronormative, carceral state. These aren't words you just pick up on the street.
This circles right back to Bourdieu's cultural capital.
Yeah.
A key component of cultural capital is the sheer time and means you have to devote to acquiring it.
Right.
Working class people who are struggling with necessary labor and resource constraints, they just don't have the leisure time or the university access needed to absorb these esoteric, complex, ideological frameworks.
So when an affluent person fluidly uses this very specific, specialized vocabulary, they're subtly signaling a verifiable history of elite education.
They're signaling, I graduated from a place where these ideas are the currency. It's an unfakeable, costly signal of intellectual prowess. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. The cognitive difficulty of mastering and articulating these complex, counterintuitive beliefs acts as its own handicap. It filters out those who just haven't made the resource investment.
So the very act of holding and broadcasting a complex idea, even if it's wrong, serves as a signal of cognitive flexibility and intellectual capacity traits that are highly prized in these prestige hierarchies.
Absolutely.
We also see this cost differential in the belief around personal agency. It seems like the most successful people, high-income individuals, are often the ones most likely to publicly state that success is mostly due to luck and connections, really downplaying the role of hard work.
And this is maybe the most destructive contradiction of all. Psychologically, having an internal locus of control, the belief that you are largely responsible for your own life's outcomes, is consistently correlated with better academic, economic, health, and relationship success. It promotes self-efficacy.
So when the affluent broadcast this belief that success is just random luck, they're undermining the very self-efficacy that lower status individuals need to motivate themselves and strive for a better life.
And here's the core hypocrisy. While these high-income individuals preach that success is luck, they are observed instructing their own children on the importance of individual effort, diligence, and prudent behavior.
So they broadcast the risky anti-agency belief publicly for the status benefit.
But they practice the prudent, pro-agency belief privately to ensure their own children's success. The belief becomes a costly handicap for anyone who actually internalizes it and abandons personal responsibility, a cost the wealthy conveniently avoid.
This whole phenomenon follows a ruthless historical pattern. It's this perpetual treadmill where the elite shed a signal the moment it trickles down and gets adopted by the masses.
This dynamic absolutely confirms that luxury label. Status signals only work when they're exclusive. Once a signal becomes democratized, its utility collapses, and the elite have to innovate a new, more costly form of distinction.
Can you give us a concrete historical example of this, starting with goods?
The spice trade is a perfect example. In the Middle Ages, spices like cinnamon or nutmeg were prohibitively expensive. They were an indisputable signal of wealth and high social rank. But then, after colonization and improved global trade routes, the costs dropped drastically.
And the general population could suddenly afford them.
So what did the aristocracy do when every middle-class merchant could suddenly afford clothes and their food?
They canceled them.
They canceled them. French elites, most famously at the court of Louis XIV, decided that spices were vulgar and uncouth. They banned them from all but the most casual of meals. They consciously abandoned this signal because it had been polluted by mass adoption. They shifted their signaling to the simplicity and refinement of non-spiced French cuisine. They needed a new frontier of exclusivity.
And this same process happened with behavior, like dueling in the United States?
Dueling, particularly in the 18th and early 19th centuries, was an elite ritual, a highly structured method for high-status men to defend their honor. It was incredibly costly. It carried the risk of death or severe injury, but it reliably signaled that a man's status was so high he could risk his life to protect his reputation.
And when did the elite abandon it?
It started to fall out of fashion when the practice was gradually adopted by the lower classes tradesmen, rougher frontiersmen, in the early 19th century. Once dueling became common among the masses, its prestige just evaporated.
It was no longer a reliable signal of elite distinction.
So the upper classes had to abandon it, even before it was officially outlawed. They moved on to subtler, more exclusive forms of social competition.
So it's clear that the modern shift to these intangible, complex ideas, these luxury beliefs, is just the latest evolutionary stage in this constant quest for hard-to-fake, costly distinction. This brings us to the psychology of it. Why do the proponents of these ideas seem to genuinely believe them even when they contradict their own lives? And for that, we have to look at the adaptive function of self-deception.
The theory of self-deception is crucial here. It suggests that our brains evolved to allow us to hold false or contradictory beliefs, primarily to facilitate interpersonal deception.
To help us lie to others more effectively.
Basically, yes. If you manage to convince yourself unconsciously of the truth of your radical idea, that meritocracy is oppression, for instance, your outward signal becomes significantly more authentic.
Because conscious deception is hard work. It's cognitively taxing. If you know you're lying, your brain is working overtime, and these subtle behavioral cues, microexpressions, changes in your voice can give you away.
Exactly. The brain, which evolved for social success, not for objective truth, it minimizes those betraying cues by compartmentalizing the knowledge. If you genuinely believe your policy position, the signal is clearer and more potent in social and mating markets.
And it provides a kind of psychological safety net.
It does. It reduces cognitive load, and it minimizes potential retribution. If the damaging effects of the belief eventually become obvious, the individual can still genuinely claim, "I truly believed it was the right thing to do," minimizing the social cost of being wrong.
This sounds incredibly adaptive, especially for people in positions of power where influence and perceived charisma are so important.
And that leads directly to the concept of self-enhancement. It's closely linked. Self-deceptive self-enhancement, so holding overly positive evaluations of yourself, or in this case of your own policy choices, allows you to display a level of confidence that isn't objectively warranted by the facts.
And confidence, whether it's warranted or not, is a powerful social tool.
It really is. It translates directly into influencing group decisions, securing leadership positions, enhancing perceived charisma. The willingness to promote radical or untested social ideas, which others might see as risky, requires this kind of unwarranted confidence. That confidence itself acts as a signal of high quality. It says, I am so assured in my ability to manage the consequences that I can afford to risk embracing this novel idea.
And we can apply this back to some of the lifestyle luxury beliefs, the idea that family is unimportant or that children thrive equally well in these novel high-risk family structures like polyamory.
These are social arrangements that clearly carry higher psychological and social risks, especially for children, whose long-term stability is often tied to predictable structures. For the elite, the self-deception here is crucial. They rationalize this high-risk lifestyle belief, convincing themselves it's universally optimal because they have extensive resources to mitigate the consequences if the arrangement fails.
They can afford therapists, private schools, lawyers, all the safety nets.
Exactly. The belief functions as an ideological flex, demonstrating an evolved capacity to handle complexity and challenge traditional norms. And it's all solidified by their confidence and their psychological insulation. Whether it's advocating for risky policies or adopting high-risk lifestyles, the confidence required to broadcast the belief functions as a costly signal of fitness and resource depth.
It's maybe the ultimate status move.
It is. Taking the political or social stance that is intellectually sophisticated, even if it's objectively dangerous, and then having the economic resources and psychological capacity to completely insulate yourself and your family from the damage it causes.
This evolutionary framework connecting the peacock's tail to a political opinion is incredibly compelling. It seems to explain a huge amount of modern elite behavior. But this is where our deep dive has to pivot. We now have to turn to the empirical test. Does this theory of luxury beliefs actually hold up under academic scrutiny when you leave the elite dinner party and survey the general population?
And this is a critical point. The academic testing of this concept presents a substantial challenge to the broad applicability of the luxury belief as status symbol hypothesis. We need to analyze the specific findings that tested two key things. First, do these beliefs actually correlate with high wealth? And second, do people use them strategically for signaling?
Okay, let's start with the first study, which tested that core assumption. Are luxury beliefs associated with high status, high income, high education in a general representative population sample?
So researchers first established that yes, agreement with luxury belief statements, things related to defunding the police, critical race theory, gender as a fluid construct, were indeed strongly correlated with left-wing political views. That was undeniable and frankly expected.
But the correlation with economic status was the big surprise.
That was the surprising result. What they found was no strong positive correlation between holding luxury beliefs and having a high income or high educational attainment overall in the general sample. In fact, for key statements, agreement with these beliefs showed a statistically significant negative correlation with income.
A negative correlation. So you're saying the wealthiest people were the least likely to agree with these statements. Which specific beliefs drove that negative finding?
The top income bracket, so individuals earning over $125,000 a year, showed strong disagreement with the luxury belief statements about drug use, the necessity of college, and gender concepts.
So this implies that the truly affluent, at least outside of that specific niche of academic or cultural elites, tend to hold more prudent, less risky, more traditional views on these fundamental behaviors.
They practice bourgeois stability, which directly contradicts the idea that they consume more of these risky beliefs. The people who could most afford the consequences are precisely the ones least likely to endorse them. It directly undermines the idea that these beliefs signal wealth redundancy in a broad sense.
Exactly. What about education? Was that a stronger predictor?
It was mixed. There were some isolated correlations. For instance, agreement with statements on white privilege and CRT did correlate positively with higher education. But when all the luxury belief statements were pooled together and you controlled for political alignment, higher education was not a consistent predictor across the board. The general association just wasn't there.
Okay, so if the beliefs don't actually correlate with wealth or education in the real world, what do observers think they signal? What's the perception?
This is a telling part of the research. They asked observers to guess the status of a hypothetical person who agreed with one of these beliefs. The perception was that these people were most likely to be currently attending college.
So it signals recent exposure to that specialized cultural capital.
Right. But Importantly, not that they necessarily had a college degree. And here's the most important part, the income perception.
What did they guess?
Observers actually perceive the luxury belief holders to be in the lowest income bracket, earning less than $50,000 a year.
That is a catastrophic failure for the signaling hypothesis outside of that elite bubble.
It is, if the signal is supposed to broadcast affluence and resource redundancy. But the general public perceives it as signaling youth, political alignment, and low income. The signal is effectively broken. In the general population, it's primarily a political and experiential signal. It signals your ideology and your university enrollment status, not your economic status.
Which leads us right into the second study, which tested the actual signaling motive. Did people adopt the beliefs more frequently when they knew they were being watched?
The signaling game model predicts that if these beliefs are used strategically, people should state them more often when the potential social reward is higher. So the study tested this by randomizing participants. One group's responses were public, shown to a supposed partner, while the other group's responses were kept secret.
And the finding?
No significant difference. There was no significant difference in the likelihood of stating luxury beliefs between the public and the private groups.
So in anonymous or close to anonymous online settings, there's no evidence that people use these beliefs for strategic signaling.
The signaling motive appears to be very weak in that context. And it makes sense because of the findings of the first study. If your audience, the general public, doesn't perceive the belief as signaling high status or wealth, then there's no reward mechanism to drive that strategic behavior.
So the researchers concluded that the hypothesis probably only holds up in very specific, face-to-face elite institutions.
Like the dinner party you described.
Where the audience already assigns high status to the radical belief, creating the necessary social pressure and reward, so the signal only works inside that enclosed echo chamber.
That seems to be the case.
This empirical weakness brings us to a powerful economic critique of the luxury label itself.
This is Brian Kaplan's critique, and it's rooted in public choice economics. Kaplan argues that the handicap principle works perfectly for genuinely costly behavior like stotting or dueling, but political luxury beliefs fail the core cost test. His premise is simple. The selfish cost of holding any political view, no matter how absurd, is essentially near zero for everyone.
For everyone, rich or poor.
Or everyone. And that's because the probability of your one vote or your one opinion ever flipping a national election is negligible.
So if a poor citizen holds an incorrect political view and a rich citizen holds that same incorrect view, the personal consequences for both of them are functionally identical, close to zero.
Exactly. So Kaplan asks, how can something be a luxury belief when the cost of consuming it is zero for the entire population? Everyone can afford to be absurdly wrong in their politics.
He does suggest the luxury label only really applies to lifestyle risks, where wealth can genuinely mitigate the consequences, like the belief that drug use is low risk.
In that narrow context, yes, wealth acts as a safety net. Rich parents can bail you out, pay for rehab. But Kaplan flips the narrative one step further. He says, if risky lifestyle beliefs were true luxury goods, then the rich should logically consume more of the risky behavior in practice.
But the empirical reality, as we just saw, is the complete opposite.
The complete opposite. The affluent tend to adhere to prudent bourgeois values, privately stable marriage, low substance use, while it is often lower status groups who adopt the riskier behaviors, believing the elite's public rhetoric.
This shifts the critique away from economic signaling and towards a moral failure on the part of the elite, the lack of noblesse oblige.
Noblesse oblige. The moral obligation of the powerful to act responsibly toward the less fortunate. Kaplan's argument is that the elite who privately benefit from prudent behaviors like marriage stability fail to altruistically preach those successful values publicly. Instead, they promote radical risky ideas that they themselves avoid, allowing lower status groups to suffer the consequences of adopting those fashionable but dangerous norms.
So the final picture is, it's complicated. The evolutionary mechanism of costly signaling is powerful. It explains the desire for distinction. But the empirical data suggests that in modern society, the signal is primarily political, not economic. And the costs of political beliefs are too low to satisfy the handicap principle.
The result is this dual standard where the elite practice prudence but preach radicalism, which leads us to our final line of inquiry. If we accept this complexity, that these beliefs are only partially about status and signaling, is there a possible adaptive societal function that's less cynical than just pure hypocrisy?
Let's explore the counter-narrative. What if luxury beliefs function as a form of social research and development?
This framing suggests that society might need a group, the powerful and the well-insulated, to experiment with new norms and ideas. It's an expensive, inefficient, and often harmful process, but it may be necessary for societal innovation. The elite, by virtue of their resources and their safety net, can afford the consequences of philosophical failure. They become society's guinea pigs for novel thought.
This implies that many ideas we now consider foundational and indispensable must have started as eccentric, fringe fixations held only by a small, high-status minority.
Historically, that is undeniable. Ideas that fundamentally improved human civilization, the abolition of slavery, religious tolerance, free markets, civil rights, they all began as...
And the charge levied against them, that they were pushing this broad, dangerous agenda for dubious moral gains, is almost identical to the charge levied against contemporary holders of luxury beliefs.
It's the same charge. So yesterday's fringe, socially costly, radical belief abolition, gay rights, became tomorrow's common sense, precisely because an insulated elite was able to afford the social risk of pressure testing those norms.
So that's the ultimate adaptive function. Even if a large percentage of contemporary luxury beliefs are, like eugenics was in the past, truly bad ideas that will eventually be discarded, the process of open societal experimentation is necessary.
It may be. And the ability to articulate and pursue a complex, counterintuitive ideological stance, the cognitive difficulty and social risk involved, that itself serves as that unfakeable, costly signal of intellectual prowess and resource redundancy in these prestige hierarchies.
So we've traced this logic all the way from Zahavi's peacock, through the critique that the signaling mechanism fails in the general public, to this idea that elite experimentation might serve as a kind of messy social R&D. We come back to the dinner party. To that executive who rejected meritocracy while privately securing her daughter's elite future.
And this deep dive really confirms the complexity. Her behavior is a blend of an evolved drive for costly status signaling, which only works inside her enclosed, high-prestige circle, combined with that moral failure of noblesse oblige preaching risk while practicing prudence. Her ability to navigate that contradiction, rationalized by psychological self-deception, is the ultimate signal of her power.
The irony persists, and it becomes the final thought. We're left with a situation where adopting a politically or socially radical idea might be the ultimate sign of freedom from necessity. The true luxury that executive possesses isn't the Wagyu beef or the private kindergarten tuition. It is the unique, high-status freedom, the ability to articulate a belief whose practical, painful consequence she will never, ever have to personally absorb.